Good morning. Here's your catch-up from the last 25 hours. You had 18 videos waiting, covering everything from AI job doom debunking and open-source model disruption to extreme PC overclocking, a massive Apple September event leak, FTC crackdowns on car dealers, the AAA gaming apocalypse, EV breakthroughs, Linux switching, and some genuinely fascinating tools for thinking better. Grab a coffee, there's a lot to get through. Let's start with Stefan Mischuk, who was fired up this week, and I mean visibly, audibly fired up. He opens by playing a clip of what he calls the White House AI czar, a billionaire, calling out fear-mongering claims from AI company CEOs, specifically Sam Altman of OpenAI. Stefan uses this as a launchpad for a full-throated argument that AI doom predictions about mass job losses are, in his words, nonsense, and he's drawing on 30 years in the tech industry to say so. His core point: he has watched this exact cycle play out over and over. New technology arrives, hysteria erupts, things settle, people learn to use it, and then job creation follows. He cites a figure of only about 5% of jobs potentially affected by AI, and even that he calls temporary. He's already seeing software developer job postings tick upward again, and he references a viewer from a previous video who reported landing a job. Stefan is particularly dismissive of Sam Altman and Dario Amodei. He jokingly calls them the same person, and cracks that they probably played Magic the Gathering or Pokémon together before Amodei left OpenAI to found Anthropic. His point isn't personal, it's structural. Both men have calculated financial incentives to push fear narratives that drive investment and attention. He lines up a history of failed doom predictions: Y2K, self-driving cars destroying all trucking jobs, which he says was being debated in Congress about a decade ago and nothing happened, and early 1980s predictions of global cooling turning Earth into a glacier. The pattern holds. He says to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, breathe, and evaluate reality without letting the lizard brain run the show. He also swings the other way. He has zero patience for people who say AI is completely useless, which he ties to political tribalism around Elon Musk. He gives the example of someone on a podcast who claimed robotics had no productive value, which he calls ridiculous. His position is clear. AI is genuinely useful, not apocalyptic, and the only billionaire he agrees with on the topic is Jeff Bezos, who is publicly predicting AI will actually create a job boom and there could even be a worker shortage. The second half of the video pivots into programming career advice and personal finance, which sounds like a detour but isn't. On programming, he argues that foundations and design patterns matter far more than specific language choice. He's written commercial software in 9 languages and says JavaScript, Java, C#, TypeScript, PHP, and most mainstream languages share nearly identical conceptual structure: variables, arrays, objects, conditional statements, loops, functions. Once you understand objects, interfaces, and abstraction, you know about 90% of most languages. Rust and assembler are the real exceptions. Then comes the personal finance section, which Stefan gets genuinely enthusiastic about because it's autobiographical. His thesis: the key variable is savings rate, not income level. He lived in a 550-square-foot apartment in Canada for 6 years despite being able to afford more, saving 40 to 80% of his income annually. His math is simple but striking. If a 10% saver can retire in 25 years, a 50% saver accomplishes in 1 year what the average person takes 5 years to do. 4 years of 50% savings equals 20 years of average savings. He says this is how he was able to effectively retire in his early 30s, with additional context that he nearly died from a blood disorder at 18 or 19, which shaped his urgency to build wealth fast. From age 30 to roughly 40, he worked about 1 or 2 hours per week, eventually got bored, and that's why he makes content now, which he describes as a hobby rather than work. His closing message ties it all together. Don't be driven by doom predictions, especially long-range ones. The further out a prediction is, the less credible it is. Stick to observable trends, learn current technologies, and save aggressively. And Stefan was back the same day with a tightly focused companion piece built around one very concrete data point. Anthropic, one of the leading AI companies, the one whose CEO he just finished mocking, has an active job listing for a software engineer at $570,000. Stefan uses this as his entire argument in miniature. If AI were truly about to eliminate software engineering jobs, why would one of the most prominent AI companies be paying that much to hire one right now? He comes in measured and a bit exasperated here, more world-weary than fired up. He frames himself as someone who has watched the same narrative cycle too many times to take either extreme seriously. His truth about AI and software development jobs comes in two statements. First, AI is the new form of software development, not a replacement for the field, but the current evolution of how it's practiced. Second, it doesn't replace developers, it changes how developers work. He notes job postings in new technology areas are starting to tick upward again, and references a video he'd published the day before where someone described being asked specifically during hiring processes how they use AI, because employers are seeing real productivity gains from developers who understand AI tooling well. That, he says, is the actual signal. He gives his clearest stack recommendation. Ground yourself in code fundamentals, prioritize web full stack as the primary deployment platform, develop system-level thinking, learn design patterns and clean code principles, understand infrastructure, and then layer the AI stack on top of all of that. That last layer, the AI stack, is what's getting people hired right now. On the doom predictions specifically, he calls the claim that developers will stop writing code within 6 months a bunch of BS, and uses Tesla self-driving as his analogy. Years ago, Teslas were going to drive themselves to work and then drive for Uber to pay themselves off. That never happened and remains far off. Overpromising on transformative timelines is a pattern, not a one-time mistake. He can't recall who said it, but references a famous quote about how boring incremental promises don't inspire people or drive investment. So leaders make enormous claims, and he invites viewers to identify the quote in the comments. His final point is about where AI disruption actually lands hardest, not on small businesses and entrepreneurs, but on large enterprises, where AI is eroding economies of scale advantages. Some jobs will fade, new ones will emerge, just like Perl CGI development once dominated and disappeared, just like Flash and ActionScript, just like Visual Basic 6. Every wave kills some roles and creates others. The developers who adapt win. Speaking of the AI landscape shifting under corporate feet, Manolo Remedi had a video this week that takes that argument much further and much more confrontationally. His subject is GLM 5.2, a new MIT-licensed open-source model from China that he argues isn't just another model release. It's an attack on the business models of the major AI corporations. Here's what makes GLM 5.2 notable. It has a 1 million token context window, it's fully MIT licensed with no use restrictions, and on benchmarks it's competitive with Claude Opus 4.8 and sometimes better than GPT-5.5. Manolo is skeptical of benchmarks alone, so he runs his own game-building test, which we'll get to. But he goes to artificial analysis. AI first to show the price comparison, and this is where the business model argument lands hardest. Claude Fable, that's Claude 4 Opus, is $3.25 per million tokens. GPT-5.5 is 83 cents per million tokens, roughly a quarter of Fable's cost. GLM 5.2 is approximately half GPT-5.5's price, making it roughly 1/8 the cost of Claude Fable. That gap is enormous. Manolo explains the Moats strategy the large labs have been using. Make the technology so expensive to build and run that it creates an impossible barrier to entry requiring billions in continuous investment. Keep the competitive field down to 2 or 3 companies. Even Meta, with its resources, hasn't broken into the top tier. That moat was based on cost and scale, and it's now being eroded by Chinese models. He gives approximate parameter counts. GLM 5.2 is around 700 billion parameters, while GPT and Claude Opus are estimated at 2 to 3 trillion, and Claude Fable is estimated at anywhere from 6 to 10 trillion parameters. GLM 5.2 at 700 billion is now genuinely competitive with models several times its size. Manolo then gets openly ideological about Anthropic. He describes their model as a 3-tier class system. Tier 1 is their friends who access experimental models like Claude Mythos. Tier 2 is people wealthy enough globally to afford $200 per month. Tier 3 is the majority of the world who cannot afford it or are actively blocked because Anthropic opposes open source. He says plainly he doesn't want to finance a company actively working against people having their own AI models, and extends this critique to OpenAI. His argument: people have been stuck, needing frontier models, but having to compromise by using companies they disapproved of. GLM 5.2 removes that dilemma. He spends real time on OpenRouter as his preferred way to access models, and his reason is genuinely interesting. OpenRouter supports cryptocurrency payments. He cites 1.7 billion people on Earth who lack bank accounts. Those people are locked out of API key-based AI services from major providers that require traditional payment methods. OpenRouter's crypto option makes AI accessible to those people. He loaded $10 and gets access to hundreds of models. On the OpenRouter leaderboard, GLM 5.2 is already ranked 14th despite being brand new, and he predicts it'll enter the top 3 within days or weeks. For local inference, he notes GLM 5.2 can run on an Apple Mac Studio Max with 512 GB of RAM, but must be heavily quantized, losing about 20% of model quality and running slowly. Serious local inference costs $50,000 to $100,000 in hardware. His own machine, equivalent to an NVIDIA DGX Spark, bought for €3,300, can comfortably run QN 3.6 at 27 billion parameters at 50 to 60 tokens per second, and the 35 billion version at 10 to 15 tokens per second. He found QN 3.6 35 billion noticeably better than Gemma for 26 billion. For his game-building test, he gave a single-shot prompt to build an HTML game to 3 models. GPT-5.5 finished in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. GLM 5.2 took 19 minutes and 7 seconds. Minimac took 18 minutes and 52 seconds. All 3 produced playable games with minor differences. His conclusion: the quality gap between a small local model and frontier models is now quite small for this kind of task. He's planning a follow-up testing QN 3.627 billion on the same prompt. His practical advice: use OpenRouter, pick monthly or quarterly plans, not yearly because the landscape changes too fast, and check artificial analysis. AI for intelligence versus price comparisons. On the topic of AI and trust, Nate B. Jones from AI News and Strategy Daily had a video this week that I think deserves your full attention because the framework he introduces is genuinely useful. He opens with a disarmingly personal admission: there is already enough clean audio of him on the internet right now to produce a convincing voice clone. And this isn't hypothetical, people have already tried. His central, counterintuitive premise is that the scary version of AI is not the perfect synthetic human. It's AI that is good enough deployed in a low-attention environment. He plays an actual labeled voice clone of himself early in the video, same disclosure text, same cadence, and reacts afterward. That was impressive and, frankly, a little creepy. He uses that tension as the entire subject. He distinguishes voice cloning from full-body presence cloning. Voice cloning is already very capable given clean source audio. Current tools pass in normal casual listening environments today in 2026. Full-body video cloning still fails in specific ways. Lips that are close but not quite right, blinking that's nearly but not quite human, hands that lack weight, expressions present but micro-expressions absent. He calls it 90% right, and the last 10% makes the whole thing feel wrong. His most important observation: the threshold for deception isn't, can this fool a forensic expert watching carefully? It's whether the synthetic media creates enough ambiguity that normal, casual audiences lose track of what relationship they have to the person on screen. YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, these are casual consumption environments, not forensic labs. This leads him to reframe the uncanny valley concept. The original uncanny valley is visual. Does the face look real? He argues the uncanny valley is now structural and relational. Do I believe there is a person behind this? Do I believe someone made a judgment? Do I believe someone is accountable? He then introduces his creator trust stack, a 5-layer framework for responsible AI media creation. Layer 1 is disclosure, not vague AI-assisted language but specific. Was the voice synthetic, the face, the script, the edit? Layer 2 is provenance. Where did source material come from? Was a voice clone trained on consented recordings? Was data licensed? Layer 3 is control, who had the ability to approve or reject the output. Layer 4 is judgment, who actually made the argument, who decided which claims were worth making. Layer 5, and he says this is the one people most want to skip, is accountability. If the content is wrong, manipulative, or harmful, who owns it? He illustrates all of this with contrast examples. A creator cleaning up audio with AI is not the same as secretly replacing themselves with a clone. A company using AI to draft a training video is not the same as cloning an employee's voice without consent. An analyst using AI to research a topic is not the same as publishing an AI-generated claim no one verified. The operative question he proposes is, where in the stack did AI operate, and where did human judgment take over to guarantee the final product? He also raises a secondary problem he finds interesting: reverse confusion. As audiences become AI suspicious, normal human behavior will start being flagged as synthetic. Someone mispronounces a word, AI. Someone wears the same shirt in multiple videos from batch recording, AI. He uses his own beanie hat as a small example of personal human idiosyncrasy that signals authenticity. His 5 recommendations for creators: disclose specifically, never clone voices or faces without consent, preserve human judgment, actively educate your audience about what synthetic media is, and for companies, build policy before the scandal. His closing line is worth quoting. Being human is no longer enough. You have to be legibly human in this world, and if you're going to be synthetic, you have to be legibly synthetic too. Zooming out to the bigger AI industry picture, the AI Daily Brief had a dense and genuinely substantive episode this week. There were 2 main threads: the ongoing Fable 5 export control situation, and a rich discussion built around a widely read Satya Nadella blog post that I think is worth your time. On Fable 5, this has been dominating the week. New reporting from Politico showed talks between the White House and Anthropic shifting in a more productive direction. The specific movement: negotiations now center on building a framework to assess the severity of security flaws in AI models, reflecting an acknowledgement by the administration that no model can be completely jailbreak-proof, which had been Anthropic's core defense all along. Earlier in the week, the White House wanted Anthropic to simply fix the jailbreak, wouldn't budge technically, and also objected to what they saw as Anthropic's nonchalant attitude, which they found hypocritical given Anthropic's safety-first brand. But outside pressure mounted. Security experts, business leaders, and legal scholars piled on. The Commerce Department apparently hadn't even filed the proper paperwork to support use of export controls this way. Former Commerce official Kevin Wolf said the approach wouldn't scale, and said he didn't know what the legal authority was for blocking foreign nationals from logging into a cloud service. UC Berkeley professor Andrew Radai called it an unsettled area of law, and said if jailbreak-proof models become the de facto legal standard, the U.S. will have no AI models at all. Overnight, the New York Post added that Anthropic has pledged to work more closely with the White House, and their managing director for International, speaking in Seoul, said, "We are very confident that in the coming days the models will become available again." The presenter was cautiously optimistic, but worried people are overreading early positive signals. There was also a late-breaking Bloomberg report that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told ASML that the U.S. government believes one of their EUV machines may have made it to China, a developing story with major implications for the hardware balance. And Bernie Sanders unveiled legislation to create a $7 trillion sovereign wealth fund through a one-time 50% equity tax on all AI companies with more than $200 million in annual AI revenue. The presenter's quick take: that's nationalization, full stop. A 50% equity stake plus voting shares equals de facto control of the entire AI industry. He also flagged that Accenture's stock dropped 18% in a single day, down 50% for the year, after missing earnings, blaming a $400 million hole from the war in Iran, though critics pointed to their failure to lead AI transformation. On product news, Claude Code announced artifacts, interactive pages built from sessions, shareable via private links on team and enterprise plans. And Codex announced Record and Replay, where you demo a recurring task and Codex converts it into an editable skill, which Microsoft's Nicolas Bustamante highlighted as especially important for legacy systems with no APIs. Now the main course. Satya Nadella's blog post titled, "A Frontier Without an Ecosystem is Not Stable," which has been viewed 65 million times. The presenter read the whole thing. The core argument: this tech transition is different from all prior platform shifts because for the first time we can create a cognitive loop between people and digital systems, not just use digital tools to enhance human capital. Every company needs both human capital, knowledge, judgment, relationships, pattern recognition, and what Nadella calls token capital, the firm's owned AI capability. Human capital doesn't become less valuable as token capital grows. It becomes more valuable because human agency drives token capital growth. Without human direction, compute runs in circles. The real opportunity isn't picking the best model. It's building a learning loop where human capital and token capital compound together. The test of sovereignty. A company should be able to swap out a generalist model without losing the company veteran expertise built into their learning system. The practical components. Private evals that measure whether a model is improving against outcomes that matter to your specific business. Private reinforcement learning environments where models grow stronger on real internal traces, and a knowledge base that makes institutional memory queryable. Nadella calls this a hill climbing machine. Every improved workflow generates better training signal, which accelerates accumulation of tacit knowledge unique to the firm. The commentary responses were excellent. Mark Adjenstat distilled the formula as token capital equals human capital times scaffolding times feedback loops, and the multiplication sign matters because zero in any term kills the whole result. He said he stopped asking clients about their AI model strategy and started asking about their feedback loops. Most companies he works with have model access, but zero scaffolding and zero feedback loops. 0 times anything is 0. Ethan Mollick warned on humility. We don't honestly know the best approaches to rebuilding companies around AI agents. Practical agents are merely months old. And Aaron Levy from Box argued, we're witnessing the emergence of an applied AI layer at scale that's far more complex and moat-generating than early skeptics expected. The presenter's bottom line: stop asking about your AI model strategy and start asking about your feedback loops, your scaffolding, and your harness engineering. Read Nadella's post in full. On a shorter but pointed note, Brian Lunjuk at the Lunjuk Journal was sardonic and world-weary this week about a story that combines two of his favorite targets, OpenAI and what he calls the slightly corrupt open source foundation business model. OpenAI has purchased a platinum membership in the Rust Foundation for $600,000, gaining a seat on its board of directors. Lunjuk reads directly from the Rust Foundation announcement, dated June 17, filed from Dover, Delaware. OpenAI's $600,000 covers both the membership fee and additional support for maintainer efforts across the Rust ecosystem, funding the Rust project goals, the Foundation's Rust Innovation Lab, and structured support for maintainers of widely depended upon Rust projects. The Rust Foundation's CEO, Dr. Rebecca Rumble, called OpenAI's investment financially significant and described OpenAI as a responsible and supportive leader in open source. OpenAI's representative on the board will be Predrag Groovsky, a member of technical staff and maintainer of cargo server checks. Lunjuk's reaction is a mix of unsurprise and dry contempt. He frames this as a standard but corrupt practice he's seen repeatedly, pointing to the Linux Foundation as the primary example. Its board is almost entirely composed of representatives from Microsoft and other large corporations who pay substantial membership fees. The Linux Foundation takes in roughly 1/3 of $1 billion per year through this model. His characterization: these foundations sell control over the open source projects they steward to corporations who want a seat at the table. He then asks what OpenAI actually gets. His theory: OpenAI uses Rust heavily in its systems and wants to help direct Rust's development toward priorities useful for building and shipping LLM systems. He also notes Rust is still in a state of flux. The language and compiler haven't been formally stabilized, so influencing its direction at this stage is meaningful. He then goes briefly personal. He's one of roughly 6 or 7 names that ChatGPT apparently refuses to discuss, causing red error messages and invoking its code of conduct. He treats this as an odd distinction and says the combination of OpenAI plus a foundation model he distrusts prompted him to jump on the story immediately. He closes by sarcastically congratulating both parties for following the standard slightly corrupt open-source foundation business model. Staying in the developer tools space for a moment, there was a really practical Claude code video from DIY Smart Code this week that's worth your time if you use it at all. The premise is a little confrontational. Most people who use Claude Code know that 7 different methods exist for giving it instructions, but they don't know how to combine them or when to use each one. And the consequence of getting it wrong is that a carefully written rule quietly never loads into the context window and has zero effect. The foundational concept the presenter builds everything around is that every instruction Claude receives must exist inside the context window. The key variable across all 7 methods is when each one loads. Getting this timing wrong either burns tokens on context you never use or leaves a rule Claude never saw. He offers a 3-axis evaluation for any method. When it loads, what it costs in context tokens, and how hard it sticks, whether it enforces or merely suggests. Method 1 is the root Claude, MD file, the most commonly used. It loads at session start, persists the whole session, and gets reinjected even after compaction, making it the most reliable location for build commands, conventions, and team norms. But it sits in context the whole time. Anthropic's own guidance is to keep it under 200 lines, assign it an owner, and treat changes to it like code reviews. In a monorepo, subdirectory Claude, MD files are the answer. Each only loads when Claude opens a file in that folder. Skills and subagents are the 2 methods that stay cheap regardless of size. Skills live in Claude skills with a skill, MD file per skill. At session start, only the name and description load. The full body is pulled in only when the skill is actually invoked. A 40-line deployment checklist costs almost nothing until the exact moment it's needed. Subagents go further. They run in their own completely fresh context window, do their work in isolation, and return only a final summary to the main session, enabling parallel task fanout without cluttering the main conversation. Then comes the method the presenter is most emphatic about, hooks. This is for anything that must happen every single time. Hooks fire on specific lifecycle events, live outside the main context window, costing almost nothing, and bypass compaction entirely. He delivers the central rule of the video with real emphasis. Every time X, always do Y belongs in a hook, not in Claude, MD. The distinction is enforcement versus suggestion. A hook enforces, Claude, MD only suggests. Use cases: running a linter on every save, sending a Slack message on session finish, blocking a dangerous command before it executes. Output styles inject instructions directly into the system, prompt at the highest instruction-following weight Claude has, and are never compacted, powerful but expensive. Reserve these for genuine role changes. Anthropic ships 3 modes: proactive, explanatory, and learning. System prompt appending is the lighter alternative, appropriate for coding standards or formatting rules scoped to a single run. The decision rules the presenter summarizes. Every time, always do this, hook. Never do this, hook plus managed settings, because only deterministic enforcement makes never stick. A 30-line procedure, skill, not Claude, MD, API-specific rules, path-scoped rule. His closing argument, Claude, MD is not the answer to everything. It's one node on a decision tree. Dumping everything into Claude. MD is quietly costing most users tokens and resulting in silently ignored rules. Shifting gears entirely, and I mean that literally, Linus Tech Tips had a genuinely impressive deep dive this week into what might be the most thoroughly tuned consumer gaming PC that has ever existed. The subject is Alan Splave Cloutier, who is #1 on the HardwareBot Global Masters overclocking list and holds over 800 overclocking world records. A few years ago, he launched Splave PC, a boutique system integrator that applies competitive overclocking knowledge to consumer gaming machines. And this week, he announced the Splave Pro. Linus comes in enthusiastic and clearly impressed, treating Splave with genuine reverence as a technical authority, but he's also asking sharp questions, not softballs. The headline number for the Splave Pro: CS2 running at over 900 frames per second, hitting over 1,000 FPS in some runs. The build uses the Corsair Air 50 400 case, chosen for its airflow ducting that directs fresh air precisely where needed and exhausts hot air out the side rather than recirculating it. The CPU is an AMD Ryzen 9 9950X3D, not the more gaming-marketed 9800X3D, which Linus challenges Splave on. Allen's reasoning: the 9950X3D is better binned on its Core 0 dies, the cores that do have 3D V-cache, overclocks better, and using AMD's game mode to disable the non-X3D CCD means they effectively get the best of both worlds. The 8 non-X3D cores are simply turned off during gaming. It also means customers don't need two machines because the 9950X3D handles productivity workloads too. GPU is an ASUS ROG Astral RTX 5090. RAM is 64 GB of G-Skill running at 6,000 MHz with the tightest latencies possible. The thermal paste story is particularly interesting. Splave removes the PTM, phase change thermal material, that ASUS pre-applies on their GPU coolers and replaces it with their own in-development compound called T1K, named after the Terminator because it contains liquid metal. Unlike conventional liquid metal, the gallium in T1K is embedded inside silicon spheres, making application as straightforward as regular paste with no risk of spillage or long-term galvanic corrosion. Result: 5 to 10 degrees lower GPU temperatures depending on the card. The BIOS tuning walkthrough is dense and fascinating. In gaming mode, memory retraining is left enabled on every boot to keep the system on a fresh, stable memory train, slows boot times, but worth it. Primary timings like TCL matter less than secondaries and tertiaries, which is where the real gains are. The most important subtiming Splave calls out is the refresh interval, which he says can almost always be maxed out for roughly 1 to 2% performance improvement, essentially for free. The CPU runs at a fixed 500 MHz rather than a variable boost clock. Fixed frequency improves 1% lows and overall smoothness because the CPU isn't hunting for its power limit mid-frame. SMT is disabled in gaming mode. Game mode is enabled to shut off the non-X3D CCD. All C-states and A-assisted power features are disabled, and AVX512 is disabled because at fixed voltage and 5500 MHz, an AVX512 workload could create a thermal crisis. About 1 in 4 or 5 chips gets rejected during the binning process. Most pass, but each is individually voltage characterized. The benchmarks against a stock-configured equivalent system are compelling. Forza Horizon 6 at 4K extreme ray tracing, about 3% improvement, GPU-bound so limited headroom. Counter-Strike 2 in a CPU-bound scenario, over 200 FPS difference at average frame rates, with Splave's machine exceeding 1,000 FPS at times versus 600 to 700 on the stock build. Cyberpunk 2077, roughly 7% improvement. Overall range across multiple runs, 7 to 12% performance improvement. Thermal results: 8 to 9 degrees cooler on CPU and roughly 12 degrees cooler on GPU compared to the stock configured equivalent. Linus is honest throughout that the performance delta won't help a bad player, but for competitive gaming it's meaningful. On a completely different kind of product launch, Max Tech this week had what might be the most comprehensive Apple September event leak video I've seen in a while. The headline: roughly 2.5 months out from September, we're apparently expecting 10 products, and one delayed product that's worth knowing about. The presenter is genuinely excited throughout, especially about the iPhone Ultra Fold and the new Siri AI. He called the latter better than I ever imagined, which is saying something. Let me walk through the lineup. First up is the Apple TV 4K, which was expected at WWDC but held back. It'll get an upgraded A17 Pro chip plus Apple's custom N1 chip bringing Bluetooth 6 and Wi-Fi 7. Most importantly, it launches alongside a revamped Siri AI and tvOS 27. Apple apparently barely discussed tvOS at WWDC, saving the reveal for the hardware launch, with Siri helping users discover shows and movies as the key use case. The iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max keep largely the same visual design, but the camera plateau is getting noticeably thicker to accommodate a 48-megapixel ultra-large sensor with a new variable aperture feature. 4 colors: silver, sky blue, black, and dark deep cherry. The dynamic island is shrinking. Apple is dropping Qualcomm modems entirely in favor of its own C2 or C2X modem, giving Apple control over both Wi-Fi and cellular. The A20 Pro chip is built on TSMC's 2nm process, with a focus on faster, more on-device AI processing. The iPhone Ultra Fold is Apple's first foldable, iPad mini-sized when open, folding down to a pocketable form factor. The outside screen is described as large and more one-hand friendly than a Pro Max. Inside offers side-by-side multitasking. Apple is claiming a crease-free display, which would be a first for any foldable. It's powered by the same A20 Pro chip and has the largest battery ever in an iPhone, estimated at least 5,400 mAh. Price: potentially $2,000 or more, partly because Tim Cook has cited a memory shortage crisis as reason for price increases. The Apple Smart Home Hub didn't appear at WWDC, so September is expected. It's wall-mountable, runs apps, features Face ID Center stage that identifies specific users and enables personalized Siri interactions and FaceTime with camera tracking as you move around a room. The presenter is personally very excited about this one. Apple Watch Ultra 4 gets its first-ever redesign, notably thinner, plus blood pressure monitoring enabled by a new heart rate sensor array. 5G satellite connectivity for the first time on any Apple Watch, and an S12 chip. HomePod Mini 2 gets new colors, upgraded drivers, a faster S10 chip up from S5, Wi-Fi 6E, and the U2 ultra-wideband chip. The full-size HomePod gets its first real audio hardware upgrade, cited by Mark Gurman. Apple Watch Series 12 is a smaller update, new heart rate sensor array, and S12 chip. The iPad Mini 8 is a full redesign. OLED for the first time, thinner bezels, A19 Pro chip with 12 GB of RAM for full Siri AI support. The unusual feature: vibration-based speakers with no visible grills or holes anywhere on the device. The presenter is cautiously skeptical. His words were, "I'm not sure if this is going to work great." And there's an Apple Smart Face ID doorbell, using actual infrared Face ID authentication for automatic unlocking when an authenticated person approaches, which is great for families with kids. The one delay: AirPods Ultra with built-in cameras, which were intended as a visual input device for Siri AI, have been pushed from September 2026 to late 2027. He calls it a bit of a bummer. Those were going to be the stepping stone toward Apple's rumored smart camera glasses. On a more philosophical note, there was a really interesting tool demo from Notice Labs this week that's worth knowing about even if you never use the specific product. The presenter introduces what he calls thought acupuncture, a method of using knowledge graph visualization to diagnose and correct imbalance or bias in your thinking or writing, directly analogized to how traditional acupuncture identifies and stimulates underrepresented points in the body's network to restore balance. The core analogy is laid out carefully. In acupuncture, the body is treated as a network. Nodes are acupoints, connections are meridians through which energy and information flow. A practitioner diagnoses imbalance by examining which areas are overactive and which are underrepresented, then applies pressure to underrepresented points to shift the system toward balance. The exact same logic, he argues, applies to thinking. Represent ideas as a network, nodes are concepts, edges are relationships, identify which clusters dominate and which are neglected, then deliberately redirect attention to the underrepresented clusters. He briefly explains the physiology of acupuncture to ground the analogy in real science. Needles activate an acupoint network, which activates the meridian network, which travels to the limbic, paralimbic, and neocortical systems, calming brain regions associated with alertness and activating rest and relaxation systems, which then act on the nerve endocrine immune network. He notes the research is peer-reviewed and linked on his website. The demonstration uses Infranotice, the tool he built. He analyzes an essay he published on network theory. When visualized as a knowledge graph, the tool immediately flags the text as biased. The body network cluster accounts for 49% of the influence in the text. Infranotice then highlights what it calls conceptual gateways, nodes with high influence but a low number of direct connections. The social network analogy he uses: people who know fewer people, but the people they know belong to many different communities. These are the underrepresented superconnectors, the points to stimulate. He then walks through the optimization cycle. Select the highlighted underrepresented clusters, ask the built-in AI to generate an idea bridging them all, add it to the graph. After adding the idea, the graph updates and Infranotice highlights a new triad. Repeat. He calls this a therapy process, iterative, each pass making the structure a bit more balanced. The AI-generated bridge idea in the demo was about building a vector bridge atlas for cities and texts, mapping disconnected urban enclaves as clusters in multi-dimensional space. He summarizes it as not just building bridges, but figuring out where bridges need to be built in the first place. The tool works at two levels of granularity: a topical overview view and a more granular concepts view. There's also a gaps feature that identifies structural gaps in the text and proposes connections between them. After several iterations, the text status shifted from biased to focused, with a few more iterations needed to reach diverse. He closes with an important note: the system isn't always about diversifying. If a text starts out dispersed rather than biased, the tool would instead guide you toward coherence. It diagnoses which direction is needed and works accordingly. The tool is Infranotice at Infranotice.com. For anyone in the AI engineering space, there was a useful behind-the-scenes update from Swix, co-founder of AI Engineer, about their World's Fair 2026 conference. He's filming in one take from his workspace because the 15-person team is too busy producing the show to do anything more polished, which sets the tone: genuine, slightly harried, clearly proud. 6 things to know. First, this year's World's Fair is bigger than all previous AI Engineer events combined. There's an entire extra day of content compared to last year. Swix's specific warning: do not fly out on July 2nd, it has some of the best programming, and the July 4th holiday creates an easy mistake. Second, the expo has grown roughly 4x compared to 2025, held at Moscow West. 4 expo stages dedicated to companies talking about what they're shipping. The hallway track and in-person meetings are the real point. There are named streets inside the venue: Attention Avenue, Backdrop Boulevard, Context Crescent, and Diffusion Drive, which Swix says is his personal favorite. Robots are welcome. The entry-level Expo Explorer ticket gives access to the full expo floor. Third, AI Engineer now has a formal academic partnership with the ACM, which has set up the conference on AI and agentic systems. They run both traditional research posters and what Swix is most excited about: posters. If you have a hot take tweet, they will print it out and put it on the floor at the same level as a paper poster, and you stand there and defend your tweet. He fumbled trying to show a generated image illustrating the concept, which was an endearing moment. Fourth, the entire third floor is the leadership track, roughly 50% of breakout space, aimed at CTOs and VPs of AI. New this year is the Token Billionaire program. If you spend on the order of 1 billion tokens per month, you qualify for a lounge experience. Some attendees spend 10 trillion per month, making 1 billion the low bar. Daily McKinsey sessions let attendees meet off the record to discuss their companies. McKinsey is working on pieces about tokenomics and agentic organization. Fifth, specific vertical tracks this year: forward deployed engineering, agentic commerce, healthcare, finance, and GTM. The special emphasis is AI in finance, which is also the basis for a pre-announced AI Engineer New York event entirely focused on finance. Swix's personal background as a sell-side trader and buy-side hedge fund professional drives this pick. Sixth, 41 side events listed and counting. Highlights include the FIFA World Cup viewing, It's a Team USA event and described as the ultimate side event, but no single venue fits 6,000 people. New this year is NEO, New Engineer Orientation, for people attending alone or complete newcomers. Already 300 signed up. Swix expects 1,000. He closed with an almost bashful note that couples have met at previous AI engineer events, which he called one of his dearest impact stories. Website is AI engineer/WF. Moving from conferences to operating systems, the Switch and Click channel marked roughly 1 year since their presenter abandoned Windows out of frustration and dove into Linux. And the result is an honest, comprehensive beginner's guide that avoids most of the Linux evangelist hype. The terminal is the single biggest psychological barrier keeping people from trying Linux. The presenter estimates it scares off 80% or more of potential switchers. Their pushback: for average daily use, the terminal is essentially untouched. Almost all terminal usage is front-loaded to the initial setup phase, installing apps, troubleshooting compatibility, getting things configured. After that, it largely sits idle. The reassurance for Windows users: if you can Google your way through command prompt issues on Windows, you already have the skill. On distro choice, despite hundreds of distros existing, the real choice collapses into 3 family trees. Debian is the most stable and beginner-friendly, but lags on software update frequency. Arch prioritizes the absolute latest updates, but expects terminal familiarity or trial by fire. Fedora sits in the middle. Specific recommendations: Zorin OS or Linux Mint for Debian, Kaki OS for Arch, plain Fedora for Fedora. Side note: SteamOS is Arch-based, so Steam Deck owners are already running Linux. A key thing the presenter didn't understand initially: the desktop environment, not the distro, determines what the desktop looks like. The distro is the engine, the DE is the car's exterior. Simple recommendations: KDE Plasma for a Windows-like experience, GNOME for Mac-like. You can switch between DEs without reinstalling your distro. On software installation, Flatpaks and AppImages are distro-agnostic click-to-install formats that work on anything, but consume substantially more disk space because each bundles its own dependencies. The IKEA analogy used is that every piece of Flatpak furniture comes with its own Allen wrench and drill that just sit around after assembly. Over time, the presenter shifted to preferring terminal-based installs: smaller, easier for the system to track, and a single command updates all of them. The standout advantage of Arch-based distros is the AUR, the Arch User Repository, a community-submitted software store with enormous availability and up-to-date versions. Caveat: anyone can submit to the AUR, so vigilance against malicious packages is necessary. On the kernel, the presenter found this term constantly referenced but poorly explained. Their analogy: the computer is a mech suit and the kernel is the pilot inside. The kernel controls all hardware access, and every application that needs hardware access must go through it. On software compatibility, the honest picture: major software like OBS and Blender has native Linux versions that work well. Niche software, keyboard peripheral apps, some emulators, Notion, is much harder. Wine and Bottles are Windows to Linux translation layers that many people recommend, but the presenter was candid. They personally found these unreliable for many applications. Practical solutions for remaining incompatible software include dual booting or running Windows as a virtual machine inside Linux. Less like running back to Windows, more like keeping a tiny Windows butler you wheel out on rare occasions. The final verdict in 3 profiles: if you're committed to leaving Windows and willing to problem solve, Linux has never been easier. If you just want an OS that works out of the box with zero Googling, Linux probably isn't for you yet. If you rely heavily on niche software for work, avoiding Windows entirely may not be feasible. The barrier to just trying Linux is essentially zero: download an ISO, flash it to a USB, boot a live environment, explore risk-free. About 30 minutes costs nothing. Now for something with genuine stakes for the gaming industry. Bellular News had a video this week that starts dry and sardonic and builds to something that feels almost like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold in a spreadsheet. The setup: for years the industry conversation has been dominated by the absence of major games. Now, Showcase Season 2026 has finally delivered. Platform flagships, established franchises, long-awaited sequels, entirely new AAA IP. The games people have been asking for are here, and the presenter's central observation is that they have all arrived at exactly the worst possible time. The explanation is GTA 6, confirmed for November 2026. November itself is essentially empty of competition. The presenter shows a release calendar where November contains Barbie Rewind, a Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters Melee Remaster, GTA 6, and a Gothic 3 console port, and describes it as a barren wasteland. No major publisher is willing to risk their launch window against GTA's marketing dominance. The void extends through mid-January. So every major publisher has clustered their releases into the preceding 8 weeks, August 27 to October 23. The presenter counts more than 30 AAA, AA, or major releases in that window. Named titles include Call of Duty, Wolverine Control Resonant, The Blood of the Dawn Walker, Onimusha, Ace Combat, and early access graduations for Valheim and RuneScape Dragonwilds. Indie games aren't even in this count. He says with visible exasperation, God help the indie games. He then makes the scale of the problem concrete with Circana data. Only 4% of US players buy more than one game per month. More than 60% of players buy no more than 2 games per year total. In a tight economy where game purchases compete with basic expenses, players default to recognizable franchises. Brand familiarity and cultural momentum favor the biggest titles. Even if a player buys a September release, they likely won't finish it before GTA 6 arrives in November. The engagement pipeline gets cut off mid-cycle. GTA Online already proved this at smaller scale. Ampere analysis data showed that a GTA Online update last December beat new game launches in player acquisition. 15.5% of new GTA Online players were drawn from Battlefield, 12.3% from Call of Duty. Fortnite alone lost 500,000 players who didn't return the following month. That was caused by an update to a 12-year-old game. The full sequel arrives in November. He specifically flags Marathon as particularly vulnerable given its live service component. Releasing in September doesn't mean escaping GTA. It means the collision hits in your second month instead of your first. Why not just delay? He addresses this directly. Some are. Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis has delayed to February 2027, Fable to the same month, Xbox publicly framing it as giving the game the dedicated moment it deserves. But February is already filling up with Metro, Fable, Tomb Raider, and Persona 4 Revival, recreating the same crowding problem on a smaller scale. Going further than February means 6 more months of funding before any revenue arrives, not in anyone's initial budget. Most publishers finish a game, need the revenue immediately, and cannot absorb additional quarters of overhead. He raises the question of whether studios would need to lay people off just to financially survive an extended delay. His likely outcomes: some studios simply cannot afford to move and will release into the crush regardless. Expected damage: games releasing prematurely, underperforming, layoffs, studio closures. The ironic tragedy, as he frames it, the return of the AAA game surge that players have been asking for will itself cause harm to some of the studios that produced it. On the consumer advocacy side, CarEdge had a video this week that's directly useful if you're in the market for a car, or if you're just fascinated by the gap between how an industry publicly presents itself and how it actually behaves in private. Ray Shefska and his son Zach are reporting back from the Auto Industry Fair Pricing and Compliance Summit in Washington, D.C., and what Zach heard there clearly surprised even him. The first major revelation: a significant number of dealerships have deliberately chosen not to change their pricing behavior until they receive an official FTC warning letter. The logic dealers use: there are roughly 60,000 dealerships in the country. The FTC doesn't have the staffing to monitor all of them, so the odds of getting caught are low enough to justify continuing business as usual. Zach emphasizes how striking it was that this wait for a letter attitude was being discussed openly and critically at the summit itself. A lawyer and a NADA representative were on stage warning that this is a bad strategy, and the NADA rep said publicly that more and more FTC enforcements should be expected going forward. Ray contextualizes the dealer mentality by comparing it to a long-standing trick with manufacturer sales bonuses. Dealers have historically fabricated sales to hit incentive targets, reasoning that by the time an audit catches up, they've had free use of the money for 2 to 5 years, and repayment doesn't include interest. Get caught, pay it back, move on. What's changing the calculus now is scale. The Lindsay Automotive Group case could cost that dealership up to $75 million in restitution to customers. That number is finally getting people's attention. A secondary threat discussed at the summit: losing a dealer franchise agreement with the manufacturer. The panel said this is relatively unlikely in practice, but the precedent is there, and the room perked up. The addendum workaround is the part Zach found most jarring to hear discussed at a fair pricing event. Dealers are required to include addendum fees in online pricing, but some dealers are now stripping addendums from their online listed price to appear competitive in search results, and then having salespeople introduce those same items on the out-the-door price worksheet in person after the customer is already at the dealership. Ray's compliant solution: make every add-on optional, offer a menu that customers can voluntarily select with their initials. The third-party listing platform problem is structural. Carscom, CarGurus, AutoTrader, and others use algorithmic pricing badges, great deal, good deal, that create a perverse incentive to advertise artificially low prices to earn those badges and get clicks, then change the price when the customer arrives. A dealer at the summit pointed out that if one dealer includes dock fees in their online price and a competitor doesn't, the comparison tools make the transparent dealer look like the worst deal. Zach says he believes the era of these badges built on phantom pricing is finally on the way out. The Carvana section is the most optimistic. Carvana purchased 7 new car dealerships, and one of them, Casa Grande CDJR, went from 30 cars per month to over 700, making it the #1 CDJR dealership in the entire country. The reason is purely process. The experience is hassle-free and faster. CarEdge's own data supports this. A-rated dealers receive 3 times the engagement from shoppers compared to lower-graded dealers, suggesting transparency is commercially rewarded. Zach closes on cautious optimism. It feels like the cleanup is finally happening. Heading into EV territory now, the Electric Viking had 3 videos this week worth covering, and we'll start with the one that made him almost incredulous. The 2026 Leapmotor C10 has just received a major free upgrade. Bigger battery, more power, faster charging, more range, and the same sticker price. He opens by recalling his drive of the original C10 about a year ago, when his main criticism was excessive beeping, which he says has since been fixed. With the 2026 update, he now calls the C10 one of the 5 best value cars in the world. In Australia, it's 49,888 AUD, roughly 35,000 USD, before on-road costs. The same upgrades are coming to European markets at the same price. The spec walkthrough: battery grows from 70 to 82 kWh. That 12 kWh addition costs the buyer nothing. Range climbs from 420 to 510 km, which he calls a massive difference and notes will hurt resale values on existing C10s. Power jumps from 160 to 220 kW, a gain of 60 kW at no extra charge. Torque rises from 320 to 360 Nm. The 0 to 100 time improves from 7.5 seconds to 6.2 seconds. The car remains a single rear motor, rear-wheel drive configuration. The biggest story, he says, is the architecture change. Leapmotor has moved the C10 from 400 volts to 800 volts, again, at no additional cost. He emphasizes that 800V is typically found on significantly more expensive vehicles and will meaningfully improve charging speeds. He positions this as something most car journalists won't highlight clearly. He also notes the tires have been upgraded from Dunlop to Yokohama Advanced Sport EV. On the downside, the C10 still lacks Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Android users can use a screen mirroring app called QD-Link, but iPhone owners have no proper solution. He calls this strange for a car this sharp on value. Then he turns sharply skeptical on the AWD Sports Plus Special Edition, priced at 53,888 AUD, only about 3,900 AUD more than the rear-wheel drive model. On paper, dual motors, 440 kW of power, 760 Nm of torque, 0 to 100 in 4 seconds flat. He consulted Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT to verify whether the AWD Sports Plus received any corresponding chassis upgrades: bigger brakes, better tires, different suspension. The answer from all three was no. What the Sports Plus does include, he notes with obvious sarcasm, is special interior mats with red stitching, logos, some decals, and a Sports Plus cargo mat. He uses a Gran Turismo analogy. Adding massive power to a car without upgrading its chassis is like bolting a huge turbo onto an unbalanced game car. His clear recommendation: avoid the AWD Sports Plus entirely. Leapmotor itself is backed by Stellantis, has delivered over 260,000 vehicles in the first 5 months of the year, and is targeting 1 million deliveries for the full year. The electric Viking was also excited this week about a different kind of family vehicle. The Kia PV5 7-seat electric passenger van has been officially confirmed for sale in the United States, Australia, Canada, the UK, and Europe, starting around $44,000 USD, making it roughly half the price of the Volkswagen ID. Buzz. He opens by confirming this is locked in for production, not rumor. He frames it as significant not just for the EV segment, but for vans in general, calling it one of the cheapest vans on the market, whether electric or petrol-powered. He personally mentioned he went surfing with his kids that day and is seriously considering buying one himself. The PV5 is part of Kia's purpose-built vehicle lineup, sitting on a dedicated skateboard platform for a completely flat floor. Step-in height is 399 millimeters, which he highlights as practical for loading kids and gear. Battery is a 71 kWh NCM pack from CATL. He explains Kia went with NMC rather than LFP because the skateboard platform's rail dimensions limited the physical size of the pack, so they needed higher energy density cells. Single front-mounted motor producing 120 kW and 250 Nm of torque. Range: the cargo version is rated at 416 km WLTP. He references a Norwegian real-world test where the PV5 reportedly achieved about 5% more range than its official claim. With the extra weight of the 7-seat configuration, he estimates around 390 km real-world. Charging is 150 kW DC, 10 to 80% in about 30 minutes. Pricing by market: Australia around $60,000 AUD. United States $44,000 for the 5-seat model, up to $56,000 for a fully loaded 7-seat long-range variant. United Kingdom from £31,500 versus the VW ID. Buzz at roughly £30,000 more. Canada $55,000 to $59,000 CAD. Features include a 13-inch infotainment screen, vehicle-to-load capability, sustainable interior materials, underfloor storage, and 1,300 liters of cargo space, with seats folded. He also mentions strong rumors of a campervan version being considered. He closes by criticizing legacy and Chinese automakers for claiming large EVs can't be built profitably, while Kia has done exactly that. He credits the Hyundai-Kia Group for leading the transition and calls the PV5 a fantastic product for families who want an electric people mover without spending 6 figures. The Electric Viking's third video this week was on BYD's move into Canada. And while the technology involved is genuinely impressive, his take on it is more nuanced than a straight hype piece. The technology: BYD's flash chargers deliver 1,500 kW and can add 250 miles, 400 km of range in roughly 5 minutes. A full charge from 10% to 97% takes just under 9 minutes. Thousands of these chargers are already deployed in China. He immediately flags a key technical constraint. These chargers cannot function without a large stationary battery pack installed alongside them. Grid connections strong enough to supply 1,500 to 2,000 kW directly are extremely rare, so a buffer battery is mandatory, making each installation very expensive. The Canada angle is the news hook. BYD hasn't sold a single car in Canada yet, But Canada, unlike the United States, has allowed Chinese EVs to enter the market. BYD is moving fast, setting up showrooms, already having hired hundreds of staff, and now posting job listings for charging infrastructure roles. Specifically, a Toronto job listing for a flash charging business development manager appeared this week. The role includes building cost and profit models for flash charging in Canada, developing local partners for power grid upgrades, and identifying optimal station locations. The presenter notes the sequencing, hiring charging infrastructure staff, before the cars are even on sale, signals how seriously BYD is treating Canada. On the global rollout, reportedly over 6,400 stations across 319 cities in China, though he explicitly flags uncertainty about this number. BYD plans 3,000 stations across Europe by end of next year, with plans also for Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. A widely cited cost figure is $670,000 per station, 2 charging cables. The presenter strongly disputes this, saying he believes the real cost in Western markets will be at least $1 million per station. Then comes his central critique. While the technology is impressive, deploying 1,500 kW chargers right now is arguably not the most sensible use of capital. Finding locations capable of drawing 2,000 kW, even with a stationary battery, is very difficult, and spending that money on 2 charging points seems inefficient. He says if you were drawing 2,000 kW from a battery bank, it would make far more practical sense to deploy 6 to 8 250 kW chargers instead, serving many more vehicles. He compares this to Tesla's strategy of deploying a larger number of moderately fast chargers, which he thinks makes more logical sense right now. In 10 years, when EV infrastructure is mature, the calculus may flip. But right now, the infrastructure isn't ready to support what BYD is building. He closes with an interesting observation. Fast enough charging could actually reduce the need for large battery packs in future EVs, since 5-minute charging changes the range anxiety equation entirely, a point he acknowledges contradicts his own past predictions. And finally, something a little different to close on. TED published a performance video this week from Ghetto Classics Dance, a group associated with the Ghetto Classics program out of Nairobi, Kenya, which is known for bringing classical music and performing arts training to youth in underserved communities, most notably in the Korogacho settlement. The performance on the TED stage blends 3 distinct dance vocabularies: ballet with its formal European classical technique, hip-hop, rooted in African American street and club culture, and African dance, drawing on traditional movement forms from the continent. There's no spoken content, no narration, no interview segments. The entire runtime is live performance. TED is billing it as a brilliant blend, and the fusion of those 3 traditions is itself a statement. That forms often siloed by culture, class, or geography can coexist and genuinely enrich one another. This one really needs to be watched rather than summarized. If you have 5 minutes, it's worth pulling up directly. That's your 25 hours in one listen. A lot of ground covered, from AI doom-busting and open-source disruption to overclocked gaming rigs, Apple leaks, FTC enforcement, a gaming industry crunch, and some genuinely practical EV and developer tooling news. Plenty to dig into further if any of those threads caught your attention.